Ustada Zaynab Ansari spent a decade studying Farsi, Arabic, and traditional Islam in the Middle East. Upon her return to the U.S., she volunteered, wrote, and taught for Sunni Path Academy, now Qibla for the Islamic Sciences. Since 2009, she has been a contributor to Seekers Guidance, an online educational portal founded by Sheikh Faraz Rabbani. Since 2010, she has taught at the Appalachian Retreat organized by the Muslim community of Knoxville and Daysir Foundation. She recently located from Atlanta, Georgia to Knoxville, Tennessee to join the Daysir Foundation as a scholar in residence. Ustada Zainab has been teaching with Rabat since 2015. She teaches the Level 2 course, Understanding the Muslim World. Welcome, Ustada.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه تسليما. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. Thank you so much for having me on. And I appreciated the beautiful nasheed that we heard just a few minutes ago. And thank you to Sheikh Tamar and the Rabata team for organizing this series of talks for Rabi Al-Awwal. So the theme that I've been given is reflections or reflecting on the passing of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and how that is ultimately, it's not a final farewell, but inshallah, what I would like to do is first start by reflecting on the timing of the passing of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. Because when we read of his passing, you know, when we read a seerah book, for example, and the seerah book is a book that follows the chronology of the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. That book is going to start with the history of the ancient Arabs. It's going to start with the lineage of the beloved Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. It's going to look at the circumstances, the events, the chronology of his life. And usually the book is going to end with the events surrounding the passing of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi sahbihi wa sallam. So it's important for us to understand that as difficult as it is to sort of read through those pages, and there are those moments, there are those high points, there are those victories, the successes, there are also the difficulties, the challenges. You know, as much as we are impacted by those events, I think what is definitely very moving and difficult to read are the events surrounding the passing of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. But there is a bit of sort of going full circle. And the way that we kind of go full circle is that the seerah books will begin with the miraculous events surrounding the birth of the Prophet, peace be upon him, in Rabi Al-Awwal, and reminding us that his passing also happened in Rabi Al-Awwal as well, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So it is definitely, there is the aspect of bidding farewell, but there's also a renewal. And that renewal is in the sense of looking at the lessons that we can gain from the passing of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to understand that even the timing of his passing in the year 11 AH, within a couple months or so of the farewell Hajj, is a reminder to us of the amazing legacy of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and the patience and the grace that he certainly epitomized when he passed away, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So I wanted to share a brief reflection from Imam al-Ghazali on the passing of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, and then look at some of the ahadith that we read as well in the Shama'il of the Prophet, peace be upon him. So one of the things that we know about the passing of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is that there were signs, and these were signs that were apparent to the Prophet, peace be upon him. Some of these signs were signs that started to take place in the year 10 after Hijrah. So for example, when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi sahbihi wa sallam made Hajj, and that was the only time that he made Hajj, and everything that we know from the rulings of Hajj and Umrah come from the Hajj al-Wada' in the year 10 AH. But when the Prophet made Hajj sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he saw the gatherings and the people that had come to perform pilgrimage from all over Arabia, when he saw the just massive numbers of people flocking to Islam, when the verses Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, إذا جاء نصر الله والفتح, when those verses were revealed, when the victory of Allah Ta'ala in the opening, so when those ayahs were revealed, the Prophet knew that the time was coming, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he really understood in the revelation of chapter 110 that in seeing the people entering into Islam in these massive numbers, that was really a culmination of the promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made to the Prophet 10 years prior to that, when the Muslims were just very small in number, when they were forced to leave Mecca as exiles, with the Quraysh mocking them, the Quraysh pretty much assuming that they had sort of gotten rid of the Muslims for good, with the Prophet leaving Mecca with probably no more than 70 or so followers. And now things again are coming full circle. Now he's back in Mecca, peace and blessings be upon him, for Fatah Mecca in the year 8 AH, 2 years later for the Hajj in the year 10 AH, with these massive numbers of people that are gathered there. So the Prophet knew, peace be upon him, he saw the people entering into Islam, afwaja, and just in waves, and he knew that this was the culmination of the promise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made, that he would restore the Prophet, peace upon him, to his hometown, to Mecca, return him to that place of origin, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. There are other signs as well, and one of the other signs that happens during that time is that Jibreel alayhi salam, who normally would review the Quran with the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, once a year, would that final year during Ramadan, so this would be Ramadan of the year 10 AH, Jibreel actually reviews the Quran twice with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another thing that happens during that time is that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is also sort of witnessing the growth of the companions and the trajectory of the Sahaba, and especially the most senior amongst the Sahaba. So one of the things that we read is that that the final illness of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, started in Safar. So now we're in the year 11 AH, and in Safar of the year 11 AH, this is when the final illness of the Prophet began, and it actually began with severe headaches that the Prophet would experience, sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. But before we look at some of those ahadith, some of them from Sayyidah Aisha, some of them from Sayyidina Anas, radiallahu ta'ala anhum, let's actually take a look at what Imam al-Ghazali says about this. And Imam al-Ghazali has a very moving book, and it's a very sobering book that he put together, called Remembrance of Death and the Afterlife. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli wa barik ala Sayyid Muhammad. So this is what he says. He reminds us that in the emissary of God, alayhi salatu wassalam, that there is a goodly example in life and in death, in word and in deed. And one of the things that I want to remind us about, my dear sisters, is that in every single aspect of the seerah of the Prophet, there's benefit for us. And the Prophet actually said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, my life is an immense good for you. You bring up new matters, and new matters are brought up for you, is what he said. Again, my life is an immense good for you, because you bring up new matters, and new matters are brought up for you. My death also is an immense good for you. Your actions will be shown to me. If I see goodness, I shall praise Allah, and if I see evil, I shall ask forgiveness of him for you. And we find this hadith from Ibn Mas'ud. It's from Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu, narrated by Al-Bazar in his Musnad, with a sound chain of trustworthy narrators. So back to Al-Ghazali, he extrapolates from this hadith, telling us that in every aspect of the seerah, there's benefit. And he says his every circumstance is a lesson to the beholders and an illumination to those who seek understanding. For never was any man more honorable in the sight of God than he who was the friend of God, his well-beloved and his intimate, his chosen one, emissary and prophet. Yet, and that this is where the cautionary tale comes in, yet see if he, subhanahu wa ta'ala, granted him, alayhi salatu wasalam, 1 hour's respite when his time came to an end. Did he prolong his life by 1 instant when it had run its course? Nay, rather he dispatched to him the noble angels, those entrusted with taking the spirits of men, who took hold of his pure and noble spirit to bear it away. They tended to it so as to carry it from his immaculate body into mercy and good pleasure, and the fine and beautiful, even to a seat of truth in the presence of the all-compassionate. But, and again, here's a cautionary tale, that the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is a human being. All right. He is the best of creation. He is the most beautiful exemplar, but he's also fully mortal. So, as Al-Ghazali notes, despite this maqam mahmud, this praiseworthy station, despite this, his affliction was great when the agony of death came, and his groaning plain. His disquiet became compounded, and his voice was raised in moaning. His color changed, sweat appeared on his brow, and as he breathed in and out, his left and right side shook, until those present at his demise wept at it, and until those who witnessed his appearance sobbed at the extremity of his condition. So with this, inshallah, I'd like to look at some of the ahadith that we have here in the Shama'il, and based upon the book that you might have. So in the book, A Portrait of the Prophet is seen by his contemporaries by Imam Tirmidhi. In this particular imprint, if you have the book, then you're going to want to go to chapter 53 in the book. Online on sunna.com, it's chapter 54. Babu ma ja'a fi wafati Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And this is when we are looking at the ahadith that detail what happens during this time. And again, the timeline is these symptoms begin to appear in Safar, and of course we know the actual passing away is in Rabi Al-Awwal, and many say it's actually on the 12th, just as his birth was, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So Anas ibn Malik said, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the last occasion when I caught sight of Allah's Messenger, peace be upon him, was the unveiling of the curtain on a Monday. I looked at his face as if it were a parchment of the Quran. As the people were performing the ritual prayer behind Abu Bakr, radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, the people were about to get restless, i.e., in other words, what's happening here is that the Prophet had taken ill, but he was well enough that members of his family supported him and they helped him to stand, and they brought him to the, because he's in the apartment of Sayyidah Aisha, which is adjacent to Masjid Nabawi, and they brought him to the entrance to the masjid, and he's looking through the curtain and he's happy because he sees that the people are being led by Sayyidina Abu Bakr, which is this is a sign of approval from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. So the people become restless because obviously they can see that the Prophet is standing there supported by his family, and the people are thinking that maybe the Prophet ﷺ is going to come out and lead them in prayer. They're so hopeful that he's getting over this illness, that he's regaining his strength. But alas, it's not meant to be. So he gestures to them to keep calm. And as Abu Bakr leads them in prayer, he casts the curtain aside. And this is actually where we get some of the fiqh of the person who's seated praying behind the imam who's standing, or vice versa, because what the Prophet does, alayhi salatu wasalam, is Abu Bakr wants to sort of recede and have the Prophet step forward to lead the prayer. But the Prophet sits down, peace and blessings be upon him, and indicates that Abu Bakr should continue to lead the people in prayer. So it's a very symbolic moment. And Sayyidina Anas tells us that the Prophet, again, it's a Monday, that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, passed away at the end of that day. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. One of the things that we learn, again, back to what Al-Ghazali said, now I'll give you the hadith, is that it's a difficult experience. And again, there are so many things in the seerah, my dear sisters, that really are coming full circle. Just like the revelation of the Quran to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is something that's very weighty, it's momentous, it is physically it's a taxing experience. We know the experience in the cave of Hira. We know that when the Prophet received revelation, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, on a day that would be bitterly cold, he would actually be perspiring. We know that companions like Zayd ibn Thabit would say that the Prophet would be resting. For example, he would be resting his head on the leg of Zayd ibn Thabit, and Zayd said that his leg would become so heavy that he thought it would just be crushed. We know that the Prophet said that sometimes the revelation would come like the ringing of a bell, and it was very difficult for him. So just as receiving revelation could be a taxing experience for the Prophet ﷺ, that we know that in his passing, he also experienced what he called sakarat al-maut. So we have the hadith from Sayyidah Aisha, عن عائشة رضي الله تعالى عنها أنها قالت رأيت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم وهو بالموت وعنده قدح فيه ماء وهو يدخل يده في القدح ثم يمسح وجهه بالماء ثم يقول اللهم أعني على منكرات أو قال على سكرات الموت. So what this means, Sayyidah Aisha is saying, I saw God's messenger, peace be upon him, when he was on the verge of death, and beside him there was a vessel containing water. And he would dip his hand into the vessel, then wipe his face with the water, saying, Oh Allah, help me against the atrocities of death or the agonies of death. And that's actually where we get a dua. There is a dua based upon this hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So in other words, we know from this hadith that it's actually permissible to make dua, to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to ease this experience, to ease the pangs of death. And we have a reference to this in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا. This is actually a reference to the angels that come to extract the ruh, the soul, from the person when they pass away. And even for the believer, it's a difficult experience. And this is the best of creation. There's that difficulty because the soul, the idea of وَالنَّازِعَاتِ غَرْقًا, it's like the soul, in a sense, it's become kind of enmeshed, like the fibers of the soul, if you will, kind of become enmeshed with the physical body of the human being, and it kind of resists that extraction. So this is one of the things that we learn from this hadith of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that it's actually permissible to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate these pangs of death. Another thing that takes place during that time, which has very important political implications, my dear sisters, is that decisions have to be made. And because of the illness of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, because towards the end he is kind of lapsing in and out of consciousness, that there is perhaps not a clear directive in terms of anything that would be written down that would actually tell the people exactly what should happen once the Prophet passes away, peace and blessings be upon him. So during this time, again, there are difficult decisions that have to be made. And what I really want to emphasize, my dear sisters, is that, and again, I'm not going to get into too many of the political aspects of this, because that would be kind of a different class, kind of for a different discussion. But there is people are really they're traumatized, they're suffering. And I think it's very important for us to read early Islamic history from that perspective, to understand that just the idea of receiving prophecy, it's so new to the Arabs. Just the idea that now the prophet is going to pass away, peace be upon him. As we know, this was something that was so tragic and difficult to comprehend for Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, that he literally is going to threaten that he's going to sort of take his sword after anybody that that announces that the prophet has passed away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So that that tells us that that these are human beings, and they're responding in a very human way to a situation that doesn't have really, that there's no precedent for that. And of course, we know the ayah, it's Ali Imran, it's 3:144. And we know that it's sort of, the companions are very, there are kind of different aspects of their personalities are going to be manifested at this time. Sayyidina Umar, who's normally kind of the stalwart, is very emotional. Again, he's threatening to go after anybody with his sword. And then Sayyidina Abu Bakr, who is normally very emotional, is the one who's very stoic. And he reminds Sayyidina Umar of the ayah, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَمَا مُحَمَّدٌ إِلَّا رَسُولٌ قَدْ خَلَتْ مِنْ قَبْلِهِ الرُّسُلُ. That Muhammad is no more than a messenger, and messengers have gone before him. And أَفَإِن مَاتَ أَوْ قُتِلَ انقلبتم على أعقابكم. He says that and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals that if he were to die or to be killed, would you regress into disbelief? So Sayyidina Umar says it's like he's heard this for the first time. So in these difficult moments, there are different groups of Sahaba that are meeting. So members of the Prophet's household, the Ahl al-Bayt, are focused on preparing, because by this time the Prophet has passed away. So they're focused on these final moments, and of course preparing the kafan and the washing and the burial of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. But there are other groups of companions that are meeting, the Muhajirin, or are meeting the Ansar, are meeting. And what we have to remind ourselves is that these are people that are so traumatized, and they're trying to figure out how to process that. And that's where, again, some of those difficult decisions that are going to end up having important ramifications for early Islamic history. This is when all of these decisions are taking place. And one of the things that we know is that even Sayyidah Aisha herself has an opinion about sort of matters before the Prophet has passed away. One of the things that he does do, and he indicates very clearly, is that he wants Sayyidina Abu Bakr to actually lead the people in prayer. And Sayyidah Aisha says no, her father is given to weeping, and the Prophet, peace upon him, again, he's dealing with these symptoms, and he's in pain, and he has his head is bandaged at this point just because of the intensity of the headaches that he's experiencing. And he actually, in a moment of some frustration, the Sayyidah Aisha basically says, I think that you all are like he says to the people around him that you all are like the women that were around Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam. In other words, don't be sort of contentious that this is what he wants to happen. And, indeed, we see what happens. Abu Bakr leads prayer. He becomes the first Khalifa. He has a strength that Sayyidina Umar is going to benefit from. As I mentioned, when Sayyidina Abu Bakr is the one who reminds him of this ayah in the Quran 3:144. Now, one of the things that we learned during this time, my dear sisters, is that the burial actually takes place at night. So Ja'far ibn Muhammad reported that his father said that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and again, this is the Prophet's family now, that the Prophet passed away on Monday, after which he remained. So he remained that day and Tuesday night, and he was buried during the night. And according to Sufyan ibn Uyayna, someone said the sound of the iron shovels could be heard during the latter part of the night as they buried him on Tuesday, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi sahbihi wasallam. There's a longer hadith about probably, I don't know how we're doing on time, so just let me know, but there's a longer hadith that tells us about some of these details. So inshallah, let me go ahead and kind of copy the inshallah, I'll just copy the link for that. So I'm going to copy the link for that and put that in the chat, and then you all can, inshallah, everyone here can see more context for, hopefully that'll take you to the particular hadith, because it tells you about just what I mentioned about Sayyidah Aisha and how the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, wants to nominate Sayyidina Abu Bakr to lead the prayer, and Sayyidah Aisha says that her father is a melancholy man, and the Prophet responds and says that no, he wants Abu Bakr to lead the prayer, and the Prophet commands Bilal to give the adhan. And again, it's such a poignant moment. And honestly, after this, Sayyidina Bilal is really not able to stay in Medina. And this is one of the things that we hear about, that the Sahaba begin to leave Medina when the Prophet passes away, peace and blessings be upon him. Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu actually says that when the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, came to Medina, it became just beautiful and illuminated, and it was enlightened and just radiant. And then when he passed away, it was like a darkness. It was just, it's just dark. In terms of, because the Prophet has passed away, like that light is just, it becomes dark. Of course, we know that there's a serenity in Masjid Nabawi and that presence is still there, but Anas does say this, that Medina becomes dark when the Prophet passes away, peace and blessings be upon him. And it's a sadness, right? It doesn't take away, of course, from the place of Medina in our hearts, nor the accomplishments of the Khilafah Rashida, the rightly guided caliphate, nor the people that live there, but the reality is that there's just this sadness that really engulfs the companions, such that people like Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu actually end up leaving Medina and to not come back for a long time. And when he finally comes back to Medina and he's going to call the adhan, tears well up in the eyes of the people, because what are they reminded of? They're reminded of those beautiful times when the Prophet was there, peace and blessings be upon him, and when Sayyidina Bilal was calling the adhan. So that's the longer hadith that I've mentioned there that you all can take a look at, inshallah. So inshallah, if you could just let me know how are we doing on time, and then I'll know, inshallah, what you'd like me to do before I wrap up my remarks, inshallah. Okay, all right, very good. So inshallah, in that case, I'm going to continue for a little bit. So also, one of the things that we learn about the passing of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is how he exemplifies being patient. And this is, again, we see this all throughout the seerah of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. We see this in how he teaches others to deal with grief and loss. And we see this in the final days of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the things that we learn from this time is that he gives advice, peace and blessings be upon him. Even, even though he's very ill, he says to the people, he basically says to pay attention to several things. One of the things that the Prophet says, peace and blessings be upon him, during this time is he mentions the importance of prayer and safeguarding the prayer. He mentions the importance of kind treatment of women, and he mentions the importance of respecting and cherishing his family, the Ahl al-Bayt. And this is very important because, again, there are going to be some very tragic events that take place shortly, shortly after the era of the rightly guided caliphs, and their era is 30 years. And we have a hadith where the Prophet reminds us, peace and blessings be upon him, that the era of prophecy will remain in place until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wills to lift it. And then the hadith tells us that after that will be the era of the rightly guided caliphate. It will remain in place until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to lift that. And in that hadith, the Prophet actually says, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, that era of rightly guided caliphate, the khilafah, he says it's the khilafah that's on the prophetic methodology, that khilafah is 30 years. So we know after the first 4 caliphs, then we have dynastic rule, and that's when we see those tragic events that tragically impact Ahl al-Bayt. So this is one of the things that we actually learn from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, during this time. The importance, again, of safeguarding the prayer, the importance of good treatment of women, and the importance of the Ahl al-Bayt. And there's actually, if I can find it, there's a hadith that I wanted to share with you all. Some say that this is a hadith of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and others say that this is maybe a saying that goes back to one of the companions. But inshallah, if I can find this particular hadith, I'll bring it for you in just a moment. But this is a hadith wherein the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, says to raise your children. I think this probably goes back to Sayyidina Ali, radiallahu ta'ala anhu. It's raise your children upon 3 characteristics is what we have. So it's a saying of a companion, Sayyidina Ali. Raise your children upon 3 characteristics. Love of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. That's number 1. Love of his family and reading the Quran. All right. Love of his family and reading the Quran. So that's basically number 2 and number 3. So again, raise your children on 3 characteristics. 1 is love of the Prophet, peace be upon him. 2 is love of his family, Ahl al-Bayt. And 3 is reading the Quran. For the bearers of the Quran will be in the shade of Allah on the day when there will be no shade except his, with his prophets and his chosen ones. Now, inshallah, just a couple more things from lessons that we have from the passing of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And one of the things is that is the lesson that we learn in terms of his passing away and the apartment of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. How the other Ummahat al-Mu'mineen recognize that it's important for him to be in the home of Sayyidah Aisha during this time. And then we have this hadith. This is also from Imam Tirmidhi on the authority of Ibn Abi Mulaika, that when the messenger of God passed away, peace and blessings be upon him, they disagreed over where to bury him. Again, they're difficult conversations they're having about where to bury him, issues of leadership and so on. Who should the leadership pass to? So Abu Bakr said, I heard Allah's messenger say something I've never forgotten. This is from Abu Bakr. He said, never has God taken a prophet from this world, but in the place where he would want to be buried. So bury him in the spot where his pallet is. And that's why the prophet was actually buried in the home of Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, with, of course, Sayyidina Abu Bakr and Sayyidina Umar. They are buried right next to him, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Now, with that, inshallah, there are a couple things that I want to say about the legacy of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, inshallah, because this is actually the next section in the Shama'il of Imam Tirmidhi. Again, it's a very beautiful way because he wants us to be able to understand this and derive lessons from it, because it's sad, it's heavy, it's difficult, but we want to kind of move beyond that which is sort of difficult and that which might kind of create kind of a melancholy, and understand that this is something that is a temporary state and that all of us have to this is the way that we get to the akhirah. Like, this is the transit. That is the point of transit to the akhirah. It's going through that experience of death, and that's how the ruh, the soul of the human being, passes to the eternal realm. So one of the amazing things that we learn from the legacy of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, is that it's not going to be a material legacy. And in fact, when you look at these ahadith, and subhanAllah, we think about sort of our circumstances, and when someone passes away, look at all the things that we have to manage. And, especially if you're in the, if you're kind of like in the American context, it's just the issue of kind of dealing with all the things that people leave behind can be something that can be so overwhelming for those that are managing that. But look at the hadith right here. One of the things that we actually learn is that Allah's messenger, peace be upon him, left nothing behind except his weaponry, a mule, and some land, which he had designated as a charity. And that's it. All right, sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. I mean, this is amazing, and it tells us something, that he was never concerned with material wealth. And he actually said, my legacy, peace upon him, will not be distributed as gold coin, nor a silver coin, i.e., it's not over the dinar and the dirham. Whatever I leave behind is, or whatever I leave beyond support for my wives, he said, and provisions for the workmen will be a charitable donation. And the thing is that the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, he epitomized the idea of zuhud, the idea of being in this world as a traveler, traveling very light, not accumulating possessions, peace and blessings be upon him. So much wealth actually passed through the Prophet's household, and he never held on to any of it. Sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. So that tells us that the true inheritance or legacy of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, are all the lessons that we learn, the lessons in character, beautiful character, the lessons in patience, the lessons in resilience, the lessons in grace. So inshallah, as we wrap up, let me just remind you of one of the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sahbihi wasallam, which I honestly, when I heard this, it's like, this was my first time, my dear sisters, ever hearing this. And it's in Bukhari and Muslim. But subhanAllah, this is one of the things in terms of just sort of the impact of loss, much like Sayyidina Umar saying it was like literally he was hearing the ayah in Ali Imran for the first time. So there is a hadith, and this hadith is from Usama ibn Zayd, who said that a daughter of the Prophet, peace be upon him, sent a message to him that her son was at his last breath, and requested the Prophet to come. And the Prophet sent back to the person with a message saying that this is what she should recite during this time. And it is, Lillahi ta'ala ma akhadh wa lahu ma a'ta. So again, Lillahi ta'ala ma akhadha wa lahu ma a'ta wa kullu shay'in 'indahu bi ajalin musamma. Very succinct, very to the point, but it's expressed with such beautiful patience. Because, she's going through a lot, she's losing her child, and the hadith doesn't specify, right? But we know that, from what I recall, it might have been Sayyida, I know Sayyida Zaynab, it might have been Sayyida Ruqayya, I don't remember which daughter it was, I'd have to double check and see that. But the young son was passing away. So the Prophet taught her to say, peace be upon him, to Allah belongs what he takes and what he gives. Again, Lillahi ma akhadh wa lahu ma a'ta. Very, very succinct. That which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took already belonged to him. That which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave, it already belonged to him. And then, وَلِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عِنْدَهُ أَجَلٍ, or وَكُلُّ شَيْءٍ عِنْدَهُ بِأَجَلٍ مُسَمَّى, and everything with him has an appointed time. It was already decided with Allah Ta'ala. So the Prophet's message was, peace and blessings be upon him. Ask her to endure patiently. And if she does that, she can expect the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we see that, again, this is the legacy, that the Prophet taught us how to live, peace and blessings be upon him. And very importantly, my dear sisters, he also taught us how to die with grace and courage and patience, alayhi salatu wasalam, not railing against fate and not ever uttering that which would displease Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is my reflection, and please forgive me, I actually did not sleep at all, so I pray that I was somewhat coherent. So please forgive me. Anything beneficial is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any mistakes are entirely my own. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi